federal investigators may have just uncovered the key piece of evidence that completely shatters Brian Hooker's entire story.
For months, the mystery of Lynette Hooker's sudden disappearance has revolved around one single claim.
Brian claims that on a dark night out in the Bahamas,
he drifted helplessly in a tiny dinghy for hours after his wife vanished into the black water, alone and fighting to survive.
But federal agents now believe the vessel itself was quietly recording exactly what happened on that fateful night. This did not come from any witness.
Not from a confession, and not from security cameras, but from the boat's own batteries. According to case reports, investigators pulled crucial data from the yacht's newly upgraded lithium battery bank. What they allegedly uncovered has fast become one of the most startling twists in this entire mystery. Because during the exact hours Brian claimed to be drifting lost at sea,
the vessel's internal logs recorded major electrical activity,
including power spikes, system activations, and equipment use. This was power usage that detectives say makes no sense if the boat was actually empty. Let that sink in for a moment. If Brian was truly miles away from the yacht that night, fighting for survival in the pitch black, who was operating the ship's systems? Who caused that power draw? And why does this digital footprint point to a totally different reality?
These critical questions are now at the heart of an escalating federal investigation.
One built on witness accounts, weather archives, and digital connection logs.
This massive pile of evidence could totally redefine what really happened to Lynette Hooker.
Before we go any deeper, remember that this is an active missing person case,
filled with heavy allegations, contested facts, and troubling details. Some of you might find details of this mystery distressing, so viewer discretion is advised. To understand why detectives locked onto the yacht's electrical power data, we have to go back to the very start
and meet the couple at the heart of this tragedy.
Way before investigators started digging into battery files and digital forensic data, Lynette and Brian Hooker seemed like a couple who had built a picture-perfect life together. For years, they logged their travels across social media, posting photos and clips from life aboard their boat,
their 46-foot sailing yacht named Soulmate.
Close friends and family and followers watched them sail across blue waters, explore remote islands, and live what looked like a dream lifestyle. From the outside, it seemed they had traded a normal life for endless ocean adventures. And right at the center of everything was Lynette. Friends always described her as independent, energetic, and incredibly loyal to the people in her life. She loved staying fit, was passionate about nature, and seemed completely happy with the life she and Brian built on the water. Her posts frequently captured her smiling out on deck, working out in the sun, exploring islands, and celebrating their journey. To those who loved her, Lynette was not the type of person to just vanish. Meanwhile, Brian Hooker brought a very practical set of skills to their boat. As a retired Marine and veteran sailor, he took total control of the vessel's technical needs. Records show he spent a lot of time upgrading systems and managing onboard tech, and wiring complex gear across the yacht. Friends called him a man obsessed with gadgets, navigation tools, and the digital networks keeping their vessel running on long ocean voyages. For years, the couple cruised the world, filming their journey for online fans as the Sailing Hookers. Their private cruiser was the ultimate symbol of freedom, of quiet retirement and endless adventure. Between tropical sunsets and peaceful anchorage in hidden coves, they seemed to live the life most people only ever dream of. But beneath those picturesque social media updates, detectives would soon start probing the darker details of their marriage. Because in the spring of 2026, this dream voyage was headed toward a sudden disappearance that would spark a massive global investigation, putting their luxury yacht at the very heart of a dark mystery, leaving one chilling question hanging over everything that came next.
What actually happened on board Soulmate the night Lynette Hooker vanished?
Then came the fateful voyage that dragged their tropical dream into the national spotlight.
On the night of April 4th,
2026, Lynette and Brian Hooker anchored their luxury sailboat, Soulmate, off the coast of Elbow Cay.
Earlier that afternoon, everything seemed normal.
they spent hours exploring the shore near Hopetown, a quiet island hub famous for its pristine marinas.
Bustling dockside eateries and local sailors. Witnesses recalled seeing them together later that evening. A local bartender recalled they seemed completely at ease.
Having dinner, sharing a few drinks, and soaking in the night before heading back out to their yacht.
According to the official timeline, Brian Hooker gave police.
The couple headed out around 7:30 p.m., boarding their dinghy to get back to Soulmate, anchored in deeper water.
But what followed would become the dark core of this entire investigation.
Brian told investigators that their short trip across the bay quickly took a dangerous turn.
He insisted that sudden rough weather and currents triggered a chaotic struggle in the blinding dark.
By his account, Lynette was thrown from the dinghy while holding the boat's ignition key.
The moment she fell in,
The motor cut out instantly, leaving him stranded in the dark. Brian claimed he desperately tried to pull her back, but by his account,
strong currents instantly swept Lynette away into the night.
within moments, she was gone.
Stranded in the broken dinghy, Brian said he drifted for hours before eventually paddling back to shore.
He eventually raised the alarm with local police,
igniting a massive rescue effort that swept through the islands.
As the news broke, rescue vessels rushed into the Sea of Abaco.
The Royal Bahamas Police Force initiated search operations, sending marine units to scour the waters.
Spotter planes joined the search from above.
Soon, the United States Coast Guard joined the mission, pouring heavy resources into finding any trace of Lynette. Teams methodically swept vast expanses of the ocean,
Praying she had clung to debris or drifted to an area they had not yet searched.
but as the hours ticked away, no trace of her emerged. There were no confirmed sightings, no distress beacons, and zero clues explaining where she went. At first, public response was filled with overwhelming sympathy. At first, it sounded like a devastating maritime tragedy. A husband and wife returning to their sailboat, a sudden accident in the dark, and a desperate struggle to survive.
To the public, Brian Hooker was just a man who had lived through a horrific nightmare.
And for a time,
Detectives seemed to believe Lynette's disappearance was exactly what it looked like, a tragic accident at sea.
but almost immediately, questions began to surface. Questions about the weather and questions about the timeline, along with questions about what happened during those critical hours between Lynette's reported disappearance and Brian's arrival on shore.
Then came something even more disturbing.
Because when detectives began comparing Brian's story against witness observations, digital records, and physical evidence,
They started finding pieces that simply did not fit.
initially, most believed it was just a heartbreaking accident. But investigators soon noticed cracks in the story, even as search crews continued scanning the waters around Elbow Cay. Detectives started doing what they do in every major investigation. They began testing the story because though Brian's account initially sounded plausible, detectives needed to see if the physical evidence actually matched what he claimed happened that night, and almost immediately they found major questions. One of the first discrepancies involved the weather. According to Brian's story, conditions on the water were harsh enough to cause the tragedy. He described a treacherous situation involving heavy winds and darkness.
Rough conditions as he and Lynette tried to make their way back to Soulmate in the dinghy.
But when detectives analyzed local weather data from that night, they reportedly uncovered something highly unexpected.
Weather records from the Sea of Abaco painted a vastly different picture.
Instead of the extreme conditions people imagined after hearing Brian's story,
Detectives found reports pointing to relatively calm waters
in the area during crucial hours of that night.
Though ocean conditions can shift rapidly and vary by location, authorities quickly focused on whether the weather was actually as dangerous as he claimed.
That didn't prove anything, but it was enough to spark a deeper investigation.
Then, detectives hit another obstacle: the rain.
According to reports later analyzed by investigators,
Weather records showed a localized band of rain moving through portions
of the area when Brian claimed he was adrift in his open dinghy.
on the surface, that might not seem important, but detectives saw it differently.
If Brian really spent out on the water,
drifting right through that heavy band of rain,
there should have been clear proof he was caught in the storm. Instead, his condition when he was found raised serious doubts.
detectives closely examined whether his physical state was consistent with someone who had spent hours exposed to the elements documented that night.
again, none of this proved what happened to Lynette, but it added another massive red flag.
Then the witnesses spoke up. Not police, not forensic experts, but normal folks living right by the anchorage.
As investigators pieced the timeline together,
They tracked down anyone near the spot where Soulmate was anchored on that specific night.
A few of them remembered a loud, strange splash echoing later in the dark.
It was not some small object hitting the water, or a typical boating sound. This was a heavy plunge, loud enough to shatter the peace of the quiet harbor.
But what really caught everyone's attention was the timing.
Based on files from the active investigation, that splash allegedly happened hours after Brian said he and Lynette had left the area in their dinghy.
detectives knew instantly how critical this could be.
Because if the timing of that splash was correct, it pointed to a very dark possibility.
Someone or something had gone over the side.
Right near the Soulmate, long after Brian's official timeline said the couple was already gone. Sure, witness accounts can be flawed. Memories can warp, and noises get misidentified.
The police understood that, but they were also looking at the bigger picture.
When totally separate clues start pointing to the exact same issue,
You cannot ignore them. Now, they had weather reports raising serious doubts, a rain timeline that did not match the suspect's story.
and eyewitness statements that simply did not fit with his version of events.
On their own, none of these facts proved anything.
But together, they formed a chilling pattern, one the homicide investigators could no longer ignore.
The closer they looked at that timeline, the less it felt like a tragic boating accident. And the deeper they dug,
The more they kept returning to that one critical question: was this whole timeline a lie?
Because if the timing was wrong, then their entire theory of the case crumbled.
so the detectives started tearing it all apart.
But if human witnesses raised questions, the digital evidence would raise a lot more.
By now, the investigation had expanded far beyond witness statements and weather logs. Now, they were auditing the vessel itself. And unlike humans, technology preserves the exact digital footprint people forget they are leaving behind.
The boat at the center of this mystery, Soulmate, was no basic sailboat.
Like most modern cruising yachts,
It had a high-tech network of marine electronics, keeping the crew connected and comfortable out at sea. Onboard navigation systems tracked its position.
security cameras monitored the deck and surroundings.
Satellite internet kept the couple online, even when anchored in the middle of nowhere. Every active system was constantly spitting out data in the background.
To the boat owners, those were just handy features. To detectives, they were silent witnesses.
With pressure mounting over Lynette's disappearance, federal agents started treating Soulmate less like a yacht and more like a digital crime scene.
Once they stepped aboard the vessel, they were not just looking for physical clues. They wanted system logs and connections,
Timestamps, and any data capable of reconstructing those critical hours right after Lynette vanished.
Every electronic device turned into a potential digital clue.
Each electronic system now held a piece of the timeline. Reports suggest one specific system quickly caught their eye: the onboard internet network of the yacht.
Like most long-range cruising vessels, Soulmate carried Starlink satellite internet technology, keeping the crew connected even when they sailed far beyond normal cell coverage.
On the surface, that might not seem critical. But detectives knew a crucial truth. Modern internet routers do far more than just browse the web. They log data every single time a phone connects. Every time a new device joins the system. Every time a connection fires up, it leaves a digital footprint behind. Detectives reportedly started digging into the router data and connection logs of the ship. The mission was straightforward: find out exactly which devices logged on and when. Because if Brian Hooker's alibi was correct, there should have been a long stretch of time when he was nowhere near that yacht.
By his own account of events,
He was lost at sea for hours in a stalled dinghy after Lynette vanished. That timeline put him miles away from the main vessel. But investigators quickly focused on whether those router logs told a completely different story. According to details that emerged later, detectives reportedly spotted device activity linked directly to systems on the boat. And that find instantly raised massive red flags, because raw data does not care about alibis. Systems do not care about excuses. They simply record the facts. Investigators started lining up those digital logs against the timeline Brian gave them, matching them minute by minute, hour by hour. And as they compared, serious doubts began to surface. The issue was not just one suspicious data point. It was the fact that several pieces of digital evidence pointed to the exact same conclusion. Where technical logs sparked doubt, eyewitness accounts did the same. Now, those silent digital records were backing up those doubts. Detectives were left wondering if the digital footprint left aboard the Soulmate matched a boat sitting completely dark and empty, while its skipper floated lost on the open sea. Or if those logs pointed to something else, something far darker. Because if someone was active on the boat during the times, Brian claimed he was stranded. Investigators demanded to know why. Who was triggering those signals? Who was using those devices? And how did this shatter the timeline that the whole defense was built on? The answers did not come easily, but one reality was staring them in the face. The deeper investigators pried into the boat's electronic networks, the more twisted the mystery became. And then they uncovered a clue that blew the entire investigation wide open. Hidden deep within the vessel was a piece of evidence they believe Brian never expected anyone to look for. That was when detectives found a trail they believe he completely overlooked. By the time detectives reached this breakthrough, they had spent months picking apart every single witness testimony, weather logs, search warrants, and digital forensics. Every clue raised new questions, but none of those compared to the shock of what detectives reportedly uncovered inside the vessel's electrical grid. Because unlike a human witness, a battery never forgets. It does not get confused like a person, and it never changes its story like a suspect. To understand why detectives focused so heavily on the battery logs aboard Soulmate, we have to look back several months before Lynette went missing. Months before detectives got involved, the vessel reportedly took a direct lightning strike. For sailors, lightning is a terrifying threat at sea. A direct hit can fry navigation gear, destroy electronics, knock out radio equipment, and wreck the critical wiring throughout the entire ship. Reports show the damage was severe enough to require massive repairs. Large parts of the vessel's wiring were completely replaced. Gear was upgraded. New tech was installed, and those upgrades included a state-of-the-art lithium battery system. Back then, no one could have ever guessed that those very batteries would eventually become crucial evidence in an active missing person investigation. To most of us, a battery is just a battery. It holds a charge, nothing more. But modern marine lithium setups are completely different. Many compact with advanced tracking technology.
designed to monitor power usage across the entire boat.
Every single power draw.
Every single time equipment boots up or a heavy load hits the grid, a precise log is created.
That data helps boat owners monitor their power supply,
Spot system issues, and track energy use while living out at sea.
But for detectives, those exact logs serve a different purpose. They reconstruct a timeline of events. That is why detectives reportedly started calling this battery system a digital black box.
It did not record voices.
And it did not capture video, but it silently tracked what the vessel was doing hour after hour,
Minute by minute, even when no one was paying attention. As soon as federal agents boarded the yacht and checked its components,
their focus immediately locked on to those battery logs.
Investigators needed an answer to one crucial question.
What exactly was happening on Soulmate the night Lynette vanished?
According to Brian Hooker's story, the answer was simple: absolutely nothing.
his alibi placed him far away from the boat.
He claimed he was stuck in a broken dinghy right after Lynette went into the water.
That timeline meant the yacht should have been completely empty, dark, quiet, and sitting silently at anchor. But reports show the battery logs told a very different story. Detectives reportedly found strange electrical activity at times when the ship should have been completely dead.
On the surface, those events seemed totally minor.
Just a quick energy draw, a minor power spike, or a piece of gear booting up.
On their own, none of these spikes prove anything suspicious.
Yachts consume power constantly. Fridges click on and off.
Automated systems trigger. Equipment draws power. That is completely normal.
What troubled the investigators was the pattern, and more importantly, the timing, because that electrical activity allegedly occurred during that exact window.
Yet Brian insisted he was nowhere near the yacht.
According to files reviewed during the investigation,
detectives discovered significant power surges in the battery logs.
These were not minor fluctuations or background static, but distinct events suggesting someone was actively operating onboard systems.
One specific type of draw caught their eye: the freshwater system.
like most cruising sailboats, Soulmate used automated pumps to distribute fresh water across the vessel.
Turn on a tap, the pump kicks in.
Run a faucet and the pump starts. Take a shower and it immediately kicks in again.
Every single cycle draws electricity.
According to records, investigators allegedly identified power signatures proving those water systems operating during that critical time frame.
Think about what that implies.
If these readings are accurate, someone was likely using water on the boat when Brian insisted it was completely empty.
That discrepancy alone was massive, but investigators found even more clues. Further electrical spikes suggested other onboard systems were running at the same time.
Cabin lighting, general electrical loads, and power usage from appliances.
Now, none of these draws are strange on an occupied yacht.
The issue is, according to the timeline Brian provided, nobody should have been on that boat.
That glaring contradiction became impossible for detectives to ignore.
Because matching the battery logs against his official timeline always led them to the exact same question.
Who triggered that activity? Who flipped those switches? Who caused those power spikes?
And why did these digital forensics contradict the exact story told to investigators?
These questions reframed the battery logs,
changing them from technical data into the absolute center of the investigation.
detectives started cross-referencing these battery records with every scrap of available evidence,
including local weather reports and witness sightings,
plus internet connection logs, movement timelines, witness statements, and search history.
The goal was not just to prove the power draw happened. They needed to see if this electrical footprint fit a much larger pattern.
And reports suggest that investigators believed it did exactly that.
Because those battery logs did not exist in a vacuum.
They lined up with other evidence that was already raising red flags. There were deep questions about the timing, questions about the exact location, and suspicions over what happened aboard Soulmate after Lynette vanished.
As police reviewed the evidence, the weight of these battery logs kept growing.
Not because digital data can solve a case alone. It cannot. Digital forensics always requires context. Detectives must figure out what triggered each event.
Check for alternative theories, test the data accuracy, and verify every single log independently. But even with those hurdles,
The battery logs reportedly offered exactly what investigators were hungry for: an objective timeline. Unlike fragile witness memories, these records were generated automatically. Unlike police interviews, they weren't colored by human emotion.
unlike public speculation, hindsight didn't shape them. They simply documented raw activity.
And physical activity can be measured, tested, compared, and verified. That explains why investigators reportedly poured so much time into analyzing those records.
Because if those battery logs proved accurate, they suggested that parts of Brian Hooker's account were incomplete, inaccurate, or just flat out wrong. And if that timeline was wrong, the very foundation of this entire case crumbled. Suddenly, detectives weren't just looking into a standard disappearance.
They were weighing competing versions of reality, one found in witness statements. Another was locked inside digital records. And the gap between those two stories seemed to be growing wider. Months earlier, this battery system was installed to protect the yacht following a lightning strike.
Now, investigators reportedly believe that very system captured crucial evidence no human ever meant to leave.
Evidence sitting quietly inside the vessel while search crews combed the open ocean.
Evidence that kept on recording long after Lynette disappeared. Clues that might finally help investigators determine what actually happened aboard Soulmate. Because by this point, authorities were no longer looking at isolated clues. They were hyper-focused on the timeline itself. And those battery records might have handed them something totally unexpected: a second digital timeline. Detectives now believe they weren't just dealing with a few conflicting stories. They had likely uncovered an objective digital timeline. Once investigators reached this advanced stage of the investigation, they stopped focusing on isolated, disjointed pieces of evidence. They were searching for patterns. Because in major investigations, especially sudden disappearances, a single clue rarely hands you all the answers. Instead, investigators map out timelines, compare witness statements, track behavior, and search for patterns that might explain what actually happened. And one major theme kept popping up throughout the Lynette Hooker investigation: technology. This investigation had already sparked tough questions about internet logs, battery records, electronic activity, and digital timelines, but now it led authorities straight to Brian Hooker's past. According to public records, investigators uncovered allegations from Brian's former job concerning advanced GPS tracking systems and sophisticated location monitoring technology. These older allegations weren't directly connected to Lynette's disappearance. Nor do past accusations automatically prove guilt in a completely separate case. Detectives understand that better than anyone, but they also know something else.
Sometimes past behavior helps explain future actions.
Especially when detectives are trying to see if specific actions fit a broader, troubling pattern.
In this specific case, investigators reportedly found the claims highly noteworthy because they touched on a core question, already driving this entire investigation. Location. Where was Brian Hooker during those critical hours the night Lynette vanished? That single question sat at the absolute heart of everything. Witness statements cast doubt on the timeline. Then, weather records did the exact same thing. Next, network logs chipped away at the official sequence. Even the battery records pointed to a different story.
And now, detectives were reportedly digging into older allegations tied to satellite tracking and location data.
Again, none of this actually proved guilt.
But it explains why detectives grew so intensely interested
In every single scrap of digital evidence.
See, when authorities suspect a timeline is flawed,
Objective records become absolutely vital. People forget key details, and eyewitnesses make mistakes. Memories fade and shift. Hard data does not.
That cold truth would loom large as this investigation moved forward.
Investigators also started looking closely at how Brian behaved after Lynette vanished.
Whenever someone disappears under highly suspicious circumstances,
Detectives dissect the actions of those closest to them. Not because odd behavior proves guilt, but because actions provide critical context.
in the immediate aftermath of that night,
Most people saw Brian as a grieving husband who survived a nightmare.
public sympathy was incredibly strong.
They saw a husband whose wife vanished into the dark, leaving him to survive the ordeal alone.
but as new details surfaced, public scrutiny intensified.
Reports show that once the initial search ended, Brian packed up, left the Bahamas, and returned to the United States while the case was still active. That sudden move sparked intense discussion among onlookers, family members, and everyone else following the mystery.
Some condemned the decision, others defended it.
But detectives tuned out the noise, focusing strictly on hard evidence. Because police know that grief affects everyone differently. Some people lean into the search, while others completely withdraw. Some do interviews, others hide. Behavior doesn't crack cases. Hard proof does. That is why police kept prioritizing digital footprints, witness statements, and concrete facts over mere speculation.
The deeper investigators dug into the file,
The more they kept hitting the same roadblock, the timeline.
Almost every lead they chased circled right back to it.
Detectives allegedly spent hours cross-referencing timestamps from various sources. Witness statements, digital footprints, weather reports, search history, and battery logs.
The mission was simple: to see if all these independent sources backed up the exact same sequence or suggested a different story entirely. This methodical process is exactly how circumstantial cases are built.
Despite what people think,
Most cases aren't cracked by one single piece of dramatic evidence.
instead, investigators assembled dozens of tiny details, each seeming entirely insignificant on its own.
But when those clues begin reinforcing one another, a larger picture starts to emerge.
Think of it like a jigsaw puzzle. One piece reveals nothing.
10 pieces show more. 50 pieces start revealing the picture.
And investigators reportedly believed that very picture was taking shape in the Hooker case.
Not because of one lone witness, and not because of one digital footprint. Not because of a single accusation, but because multiple independent sources started raising the very same questions. Hard questions about where Brian was. Questions about what really happened aboard Soulmate.
Doubts about whether the events of that night actually played out the way they first claimed.
By this point, investigators had spent months combing through digital evidence, grilling witnesses, checking records, and testing out every timeline.
And as they kept building that timeline, they realized there was still one more kind of proof they had to look at.
Because while data trails showed them one version of events, detectives still needed to prove if the vessel itself held physical clues
That would either back up or completely shatter their current theories.
That was when investigators turned their focus to the physical clues on board. While they kept digging through Soulmate's digital trail,
They were simultaneously running a much more old-school kind of police work.
they cataloged everything, compartment by compartment.
Every single storage locker, piece of equipment, and item that belonged on that yacht.
Because when you are trying to piece together someone's final hours, even ordinary items can hold massive clues.
And on the Soulmate, a few specific objects quickly raised eyebrows.
First on the list, Lynette's workout gear. Friends, family, and online posts all pointed to a woman who was obsessed with staying healthy.
Even out at sea, she made sure to keep up her active routine.
Photos on her profiles showed her working out on deck.
staying fit during her travels, and putting wellness at the center of her life.
That might sound minor, but detectives always focus closely on daily habits.
People follow highly predictable patterns. Everyday items can tell us an incredible amount about how someone lived and, more importantly, what happened to them.
As the probe deepened, investigators began tracking down the workout gear that was once clearly visible on the yacht. They zeroed in on the free weights and dumbbells that Lynette used for her routines.
Serious questions arose about whether all of those weights were actually still on board.
Police combed through photos and videos,
Scanning social media and witness tips to map out exactly what was on the boat before she vanished.
This process was completely standard.
In major cases, detectives constantly compare old photos against what is left behind.
They search for anything out of place, anything shifted, or anything that feels wrong.
Anything that went missing.
And especially any clue that could explain the exact timeline.
Just because gym gear was missing did not immediately prove a crime occurred. Far from it. Items get lost, tossed away, moved to other spots, or simply misidentified.
Detectives fully understood those possibilities. But with so many existing questions about timing and specific locations, and missing physical evidence, any item that was hard to find naturally raised suspicions.
and those weights were not the only gear police were looking for.
They quickly shifted their focus to the yacht's diving equipment.
For sailors cruising through the Bahamas, carrying scuba gear is completely normal.
After all, the region is famous for reefs, wildlife, and crystal-clear waters.
Most liveaboard cruisers keep tanks, regulators, and other basic diving gear ready for daily life on the water.
Lynette and Brian were no different.
Based on reports,
The couple kept dive gear on Soulmate, and investigators later thoroughly examined those items to piece together what happened when Lynette went missing.
but what caught the detectives' attention was the actual condition of specific tanks.
Investigators reportedly examined
Data showing strange differences in how that diving gear was used right before the incident.
Specifically,
Authorities checked if specific tanks had been used recently and if that timeline matched Brian's version of events. Yet again, the real issue was not just what they found.
it was the troubling questions those findings raised.
if someone recently used that gear, who was it and when?
More importantly, did that match up with the official timeline?
These questions became critical because detectives were already busy, reviewing multiple pieces of evidence that seemed to contradict key parts of Brian's story. The battery logs, the network data, the witness statements, and the weather forecasts, each clue was analyzed on its own. But investigators also needed to see if these puzzle pieces overlapped,
If they all pointed to the same conclusion,
or if they were just random, unrelated events.
That difference is massive because one of the biggest errors
Observers make in high-profile mysteries is treating every single clue as equally important.
detectives do not work that way.
a theory is not evidence, a possibility is not proof, and questions are not conclusions.
During this complex case,
Police have reportedly chased down many different scenarios to figure out what happened aboard Soulmate. Some of those paths lead to innocent mistakes. Others point to much darker possibilities. Right now, most public details are still just unproven allegations,
Working theories or areas of active interest rather than hard facts.
That is exactly why detectives focus so heavily on corroboration. A single clue rarely cracks a case. A witness could easily be mistaken.
Digital files always need proper context.
And missing items might have vanished for reasons that have nothing to do with a crime. But when several separate pieces of evidence start pointing to the same truth, police take notice. And that is exactly what appears to be happening in the search for Lynette. Investigators reportedly found themselves staring at a mountain of unexplained clues.
Doubts about the timeline, about the weather, and about witness statements.
questions about online activity,
questions about battery logs, and about the gear left on the boat. On its own, each question had an explanation.
but together they created a mystery that detectives could not ignore.
Because after months of checking reads,
Despite countless hours of analysis and intense public scrutiny, one single fact remained completely unchanged. Lynette Hooker was still missing.
without knowing exactly what happened to her, each new clue only deepens the mystery. Even after all of these developments, one massive question remains.
Almost every major investigation hits a wall where the facts stop matching up. It is the moment when a simple, straightforward explanation becomes incredibly complicated.
For investigators tracking the disappearance of Lynette Hooker,
That exact moment came when they started
comparing the official story against the evidence they were actually finding.
Because when the case first began, the story seemed tragically simple.
a husband and wife heading back to their sailboat in the Bahamas. Then tragedy struck. A woman fell into the water and, despite massive search efforts, vanished completely.
It felt like the kind of tragic boating accident that happens every single year.
At least, that is what everyone first believed.
But then, the timeline began to fall apart.
Detectives started digging into the weather logs, finding questions they just could not ignore.
They double-checked witness statements, finding details that clashed with the husband's story. They tracked down digital footprints, uncovering online activity that did not match the timeline they were given. Then came the battery logs, a quiet piece of data that turned a simple missing person case into a major investigation. Because, according to official reports, those digital files allegedly tracked power usage aboard the yacht Soulmate, while Brian Hooker claimed he was stranded somewhere else. It was not a witness statement, nor a rumor,
Or some wild theory.
This was cold, hard data, a digital record capturing a timeline that did not rely on human memory. And that is exactly what makes this case so strange.
Most cases rely on human memory, what people saw, what they claim happened, or what they recall. But tech does not spin narratives or offer excuses. It simply logs the cold facts.
Detectives reportedly spent hours comparing those power logs against Brian's specific timeline.
And with every look, new questions popped up.
Why did what witnesses saw seem to clash with parts of his story?
Why did local weather data suddenly become so critical?
Why did web records suggest activity that detectives felt needed a closer look? And why did battery logs show power draining on a boat that was supposed to be completely empty?
Most of all, if Brian's story is the absolute truth,
How are authorities supposed to explain away these glaring digital red flags?
These questions remain at the very heart of the case today.
Police have reportedly spent months picking apart evidence and digital files,
re-interviewing key witnesses,
And painstakingly reconstructing the night Lynette disappeared.
This tragic mystery has captured attention far beyond the Bahamas,
sparking massive interest and online debate among true crime communities and boating experts alike.
But even with all eyes on the case, one fact stands.
Lynette Hooker has never been found.
Without clear answers, the cold case continues to spark endless theories. For some, the clues point to nothing more than a tragic accident. Others suspect detectives are uncovering traces of a much darker, deliberate act.
But whatever the public believes, the police must meet a far higher standard.
Questions are not enough. Mere suspicion is not enough. Even contradictions fall short. Authorities must establish solid facts.
They must prove their case, separating wild theories from hard evidence.
That work is agonizingly slow, particularly when analyzing complex digital forensics. Deep ocean waters,
Or events that unfolded far beyond the reach of security cameras.
As of today, no court has handed down a final ruling on what happened to Lynette Hooker that night.
Detectives are still reviewing the clues and dissecting how she vanished.
Which leads us straight back to the mystery that started it all, the batteries. Amidst all the files scrutinized, from local weather logs to witness accounts and web data,
And gear checklists.
and mapped out timelines, those simple battery logs may prove crucial. Because unlike human beings, batteries simply do not forget.
They never get confused. They do not change their story. They quietly record every single power draw,
Every system startup,
And every electrical pulse, staying hidden until detectives finally realize their true worth.
If the police are right, this silent data captured a truth that human memory completely missed.
a timeline that was set in stone long before detectives arrived, long before anyone knew these files even mattered,
And maybe before anyone fully understood what occurred aboard Soulmate. Today, the search for answers still goes on.
A family still lives in limbo, while a mystery born in the Bahamas waters remains unsolved.
Which leaves us with one question. What really happened?
To Lynette Hooger,